Hello, hello. How is everybody doing today? Anybody in chat? Well, today we're doing something... hey Kieran. Today we're doing something a little bit different. Just under the chat. Yeah, don't worry. I wasn't talking. I was getting set up. Today we're reading Sherlock Holmes. This is oh, I should wait. Don't worry. I'm just doing an opening spiel right now. We're just chatting right now. Today we're reading Arthur Conan Doyle's A Study in Scarlet. Do you think I should put on the music again? Should I give it a few more minutes? Hello. Hello, Knives. Oh, you didn't hear any music? Playing on my end. We've been playing through. Do you hear the fireplace? Oh, you heard the fireplace and the music? Alright. Kieran's just schizophrenic. Oh. Don't bully him. This is a nice stream. This is a fun, relaxing stream. No fighting, children. So, as I said, today we're reading A Study in Scarlet by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. You can see this is actually the magazine where this was first publicized. It was first printed inside Beaton's Christmas Annual, and this is the first illustration associated with A Study in Scarlet. I have my big book of the complete Sherlock Holmes here. It's a hefty book, a very hefty book. I do not think that we will be able to go through all of it, but we will certainly be reading. And yes, I will be doing the voices. However, this is not an audiobook. This is just casual reading. I will be interacting with you guys and chatting and such. If I ignore you, I apologize. Or if you said something very strange, I do not. But without further ado, A Study in Scarlet, Part 1. Being a reprint from the reminiscences of John H. Watson, M.D., late of the Army Medical Department. Chapter 1. Mr. Sherlock Holmes. In the year 1878, I took my degree of Doctor of Medicine of the University of London and proceeded to Netley to go through the course prescribed for surgeons in the Army. Having completed my studies there, I was duly attached to the 5th Northumberland Fusiliers as assistant surgeon. The regiment was stationed in India for some time, and before I could join it, the Second Afghan War had broken out. On landing at Bombay, I learned that my corps had advanced through the passes, was already deep in the enemy's country. I followed, however, with many other officers who were in the same situation as myself, and succeeded in reaching the Kandahar in safety, where I found my regiment, and at once entered upon my new duties. The campaign brought honors and promotion to many, but for me, it had nothing but misfortune and disaster. I was removed from my brigade and attached to the Berkshires, with whom I served at the final battle of Maiwan. There I was struck on the shoulder by a Giselle bullet, into the hands of the murderous Ghazis. Had it not been for the devotion and courage shown by Murray, my orderly, who threw me across a pack horse, and succeeded in bringing me safely to the British lines. Hello, Versal. Welcome, welcome. Worn in pain and weak from the prolonged hardships which I had undergone, I was removed with a great train of wounded sufferers to the base hospital at Peshawar. Here I rallied, and I had already improved so far as to be able to walk about on the wards, and even to bask a little on the veranda when I was struck down by an enteric fever, that curse of our Indian possessions. For months of my life was despaired of, and when at last I came to myself and became convalescent, I was so weak and emaciated that a medical board determined that not a day should be lost in sending me back to England. I was dispatched accordingly in the troop ship Orontes, and landed a month later on Portsmouth jetty, with my health irretrievably ruined, but with permission from a paternal government to spend the next 9 months in attempting to improve it. I had neither kith nor kin in England, and was therefore free as air, or as free as an income of 11 shillings and 6 pence a day would permit a man to be. Under such circumstances, I naturally gravitated to London, that great cesspool into which all the loungers and idlers of the empire are irresistibly drained. There I stayed for some time at a private hotel in the Strand, leading a comfortless, meaningless existence, and spending such money as I had, considerably more freely than I ought. So alarming did the state of my finances become, that I soon realized I must either leave the metropolis and rusticate somewhere in the country, or that I must make a complete alteration in my style of living. Choosing the latter alternative, I began by making up my mind to leave the hotel and take up my quarters in some less pretentious and less expensive domicile. On the very day that I had come to this conclusion, I was standing at the Criterion bar, when someone tapped me on the shoulder, and turning around I recognized young Stamford, who had been a dresser under me at Bart's. The sight of a friendly face in the great wilderness of London is a pleasant thing to a lonely man indeed. In old days, Stamford had never been a particularly crony of mine, but now I hailed him with enthusiasm, and he, in his turn, appeared to be delighted to see me. In the exuberance of my joy, I asked him to lunch with me at the Holborn, and we started off together in a hansom. "Whatever have you been doing with yourself, Watson?" he asked me in an undisguised wonder, as we rattled through the crowded London streets. "You're as thin as lath, and brown as a nut." I gave him a short sketch of my adventures, and had hardly concluded it by the time we had reached our destination. "Oh, devil!" he said, commiseratingly, after he had listened to my misfortunes. "What are you up to now?" "Looking for lodgings," I answered, trying to solve the problem as to whether it is possible to get comfortable rooms at a reasonable price. "That's a strange thing," remarked my companion. "You're the second man today who has used that expression to me." "And who was the first?" Meet an old friend immediately called Brown. I believe he was commenting on his tan from being in the Middle East. But it is a funny thing indeed in the modern context. Find my sippage. "A fellow who is working at the chemical laboratory up at the hospital. He was bemoaning himself this morning because he could not get someone to go halves with him in some nice rooms which he had found, and which were too much for his purse. By Jove! I cried. If he really wants someone to share the rooms and the expense, I am the very man for him. I should prefer having a partner to being alone. Young Stamford looked rather strangely at me over his wineglass. You don't know Sherlock Holmes yet, he said. Perhaps you would not care for him as a constant companion. Oh, I didn't say there was anything against them. Oh, wait. Skip the line. Why? What is there against him? Oh, I didn't say there was anything against him. He's a little queer in his ideas, an enthusiast in some branches of science. As far as I know, he's a decent fellow enough. Medical student, I suppose, said I. No, I've no idea what he intends to go in for. I believe he is well up in anatomy. He's a first-class chemist. But, as far as I know, he's never taken out any systematic medical classes. His studies are very desultory and eccentric, but he has amassed a lot of out-of-the-way knowledge which would astonish his professors. You ever ask him what he was going in for? No, he's not a man that is easy to draw out. Though he can communicate enough when fancy seizes him. I should like to meet him, I said. If I am to lodge with anyone, I should prefer a man of studious and quiet habits. I am not enough yet to stand much noise or excitement. I had enough of both in Afghanistan to last me the remainder of my natural existence. How could I meet this friend of yours? He's sure to be at the laboratory, returned my companion. He either avoids the place for weeks, or else he works there from morning till night. If you like, we will drive round together after luncheon. Certainly, I answered. The conversation drifted away into other channels. As we made our way to the hospital after leaving the Holborn, Stamford gave me a few more particulars about the gentleman whom I proposed to take as a fellow lodger. You mustn't blame me if you don't get on with him, he said. I know nothing more of him than I've learned from meeting him occasionally at the laboratory. You proposed on this agreement, so you must not hold me responsible. If we don't get on it, I will be easy to part company. It seems to me, Stamford, I added, looking hard at my companion. Hello, Bagel. That you have some reason for washing your hands of this matter. Is this fellow's temper so formidable? Or what is it? Don't be mealy-mouthed about it. It is not easy to express the inexpressible. Holmes is a little too scientific for my tastes. It approaches to the cold-bloodedness. I could imagine his friend giving a friend a little pinch of the latest vegetable alkaloid, not out of malevolence, you understand, but simply out of a spirit of inquiry, in order to have an accurate idea of the effects. To do him justice, I think he would take it himself with the same readiness. He appears to have a passion for definite and exact knowledge. Very right, too. Yes, but it must maybe push to excess. When it comes to beating the subjects in the dissecting rooms with a stick, it is certainly taking a rather bizarre shape. Beating the subjects! And yet, you see he's not a medical student? Oh wait, skip the line. Yes! Wait. Yes! To verify how far bruises may be produced after death. I saw him at it with my own eyes. And yet you say he's not a medical student? No, and heaven knows what the objects of his studies are, but here we are. And you must form your own impressions about him. As he spoke, we turned down a narrow lane and passed through a small side door, which opened into a wing of the great hospital. Familiar ground to me, and I needed no guiding as we ascended the bleak stone staircase and made our way down the long corridor with its vista of whitewashed wall and dun-colored doors. Dun-colored? That's a weird word. Comrade. Bagel. My friend. My informant. What is dun? What is the color dun? Research. Near the farther end, a low arched passage branched away. Yes, done. Look it up. Do research for me while I read. On with you. On with you, minion. Let's see. Near the farther end, a low arched passage branched away from it and led to a chemical laboratory. This was a lofty chamber, lined and littered with countless bottles. Broad, low tables were scattered about, which bristled with retorts, test tubes, and little Bunsen lamps, with their blue, flickering flames. There was only one student in the room, who was bending over a distant table, absorbed in his work. At the sound of our steps, he glanced around and sprang to his feet with a cry of pleasure. "I found it! I found it!" he shouted to my companion, running towards us with a test tube in his hand. "I have found a reagent which is precipitated by hemoglobin, and by nothing else." He had discovered a gold mine. Great delight could not have shown upon his features. "Dr. Watson, Mr. Sherlock Holmes." Send the definition over Discord. Wait. No, you didn't. Pranked me. You sent nothing. You fool. You cad. "How are you?" he said cordially, gripping my hand with a strength for which I could barely have given him credit. "You've been in Afghanistan, I perceive." "How on earth did you know that?" I asked him in astonishment. "Never mind," said he, chuckling to himself. "The question is now hemoglobin. No doubt you see the significance of this discovery of mine." "It's interesting chemically, no doubt," I answered, "but practically..." "Why, man, it is the most practical medical legal discovery for years. Don't you see that it gives us an infallible test for bloodstains? Come over here now." He seized me by the coat sleeve in his eagerness and drew me over to the table at which he had been working. "Let us have some fresh blood," he said, digging a long bodkin into his finger and drawing off the resulting drop of blood in a chemical pipette. "Now, I add this small quantity of blood to a liter of water. You perceive that the resulting mixture has the appearance of pure water. The proportion of blood cannot be more than 1 in a million. I have no doubt, however, that we shall be able to obtain the characteristic reaction." As he spoke, he threw into the vessel a few white crystals and added some drops of transparent fluid. In an instant, the contents assumed a dull mahogany color, and a brownish dust was precipitated at the bottom of the glass jar. You sent it over? See what done is. A red tan, such as in a brown horse. I see. Thank you, Bagel. Good work. And Festive sent me "done with D's nuts." Thank you. Very cool. Very helpful. Appreciated. I've been got. Let's see. "Ha ha!" he cried, clapping his hands, looking as delighted as a child with a new toy. "What do you think of that?" "It seems to be a very delicate test," I remarked. "Beautiful! Beautiful! The old Guaiacum? The old Guaiacum test was very clumsy and uncertain. So is the microscopic examination of blood for glub corpuscles. The latter is valueless if the stains are a few hours old. Now, this appears to act well whether the blood is old or new. Had this test been invented, there are hundreds of men now walking the earth who could long ago have paid the penalty of their crimes." "Indeed. I murmured. Criminal cases continue hanging on that one point. A man is suspected of crime months, perhaps, after it has been committed. His linen or clothes are examined, and brownish stains are discovered upon them. Are they blood stains, or mud stains, or rust stains, or fruit stains? What are they? That is the question which has puzzled many an expert, and why? Because there was no reliable test. Now, we have the Sherlock Holmes test, and there will no longer be any difficulty. His eyes fairly glittered as he spoke. He put his hand over his heart and bowed as if to some applauding crowd conjured up by his imagination. You ought to be congratulated, I remarked, considerably surprised at his enthusiasm. There was the case of von Bischoff at Frankfurt last year. He would certainly have been hung had this test been in existence. There was Mason of Bradford, and the notorious Muller, and Levre of Montpellier, and Samson of New Orleans. I could name a score of cases in which it could have been decisive. You seem to be a walking calendar of crime. Oh, that's Stanford. You seem to be a walking calendar of crime, said Stanford. You might start a paper on those lines. Call it Police News of the Past. Very interesting reading, and might make two. Regarded Sherlock Holmes, striking a small piece of plaster over the prick of his finger. I have to be careful, he continued, turning with a smile. For I dabble with poisons a good deal. He held out his hand as he spoke, and I noticed that it was mottled all over with similar pieces of plaster, and discolored with strong acids. We came here on business, said Stanford, sitting down on a three-legged stool and pushing another one in my direction with his foot. My friend here wants to take diggings, and you were complaining that you could get no one to halves with you. I thought I had better bring you two together. Sherlock Holmes seemed delighted at the idea of sharing rooms with me. I have my eye on a suite in Baker Street, he said. You would suit us down to the ground. You don't mind the smell of strong tobacco, I hope? I always smoke a good ships myself. That's good enough. I generally have chemicals about and occasionally do experiments. Would that annoy you? By no means. Let me see. What are my other shortcomings? I get in the dumps at times and don't open my mouth for days on end. You should not think I am sulky when I do that. Just leave me alone. I'll soon be right. What if you confess now? It's just as well for two fellows to know the worst of one another before they begin to live together. I laughed at the cross-examination. I keep a bullpup, I said, and I object to rows because my nerves are shaken. I get up in all sorts of ungodly hours, and I'm extremely lazy. I have another set of vices which but those are the principal ones at present. Do you include violin playing in your category of rows? He asked, anxiously. Depends on the player, I answered. A well-played violin is a treat for the gods. A badly played one. Oh, that's all right, he cried with a merry laugh. I think we may consider the thing settled. That is, if the rooms are agreed to. When should we see them? Call for me at noon tomorrow, and we'll go together and settle everything, he answered. All right, noon exactly, said I, shaking his hand. We left him working among his chemicals and walked towards my hotel. By the way, I asked, suddenly stopping upon Stanford, how the deuce did he know that I had come from Afghanistan? My companion smiled an enigmatic smile. That's just his little peculiarity, he said. A good many people have wanted to know how he finds things out. Oh, a mystery, is it? I cried, rubbing my hands. This is very piquant. I am much obliged for you to bring us together. The proper study of mankind is man, you know. You must study him, then, Stanford said, as he bade me goodbye. We'll find him a knotty problem, though. I'll wager he learns more about you than you about him. Goodbye. Goodbye, I answered, and strolled on to my hotel, considerably interested in my new acquaintance. take a sip of my tea. One of my water, forgive me. Chapter 2. Science of Deduction. We met the next day, as he had arranged, and inspected the rooms at number 221B Baker Street, of which he had spoken of at our meeting. It consisted of a couple comfortable bedrooms and a single large airy sitting room, cheerfully furnished and illuminated by 2 broad windows, though desirable in every way for these apartments. So moderate did the terms seem that, when divided between us, the bargain was concluded on the spot, and we were soon entered in possession. That very evening I moved my things round from the hotel, and on the following morning Sherlock Holmes followed me with several boxes and portmanteaus. For a day or two we were busily employed in unpacking and laying out our property to the best advantage. That done, we gradually began to settle down and accommodate ourselves in our new surroundings. Holmes was certainly not a difficult man to live with. He was quiet in his ways, and his habits were pure. It was rare for him to be up after 10 at night, and he had invariably breakfasted and gone out before I rose in the morning. Sometimes he spent his day at the chemical laboratory, and sometimes in the dissecting. Occasionally in long walks which appeared to take him into the lowest portions of the city. Nothing could exceed his energy when the working fit was upon him, but now and again a reaction would seize him. For days on end he would lie on the sofa, hardly uttering a word or moving a muscle from morning to night. On these occasions, I noticed such a dreamy, vacant expression in his eyes that I might have suspected him of being addicted to some narcotic, had not the temperance and cleanliness of his whole life forbidden such a notion. As the weeks went by, my interest in him and my curiosity as to the aims of his life gradually deepened and increased. His very person and appearance were to strike the attention of the most casual observer. In height he was rather over 6 feet, so excessively lean that he seemed to be considerably taller. His eyes were sharp and piercing, save for those intervals of torpor which I have alluded, and his thin, hawk-like nose gave him the expression of an air of alertness and decision. His chin, too, had the prominence and squareness which mark the man of determination. His hands were invariably blotted with ink and stained with chemicals, yet he was possessed of an extraordinary delicacy of touch, and I frequently had occasion to observe when I watched him manipulating his fragile philosophical instruments. The reader may set me down as a hopeless busybody, but I confess how much this man stimulated my curiosity, and how often I endeavored to break through the reticence which he showed me on all that concerned himself. Before pronouncing judgment, however, be it remembered how objectless was my life, and how little there was to engage my attention. My health forbade me from venturing out unless the weather was exceptionally genial. I had no friends who would call upon me and break the monotony of my daily existence. Under these circumstances, I eagerly hailed the little mystery which hung around my companion, and spent much of my time in endeavoring to unravel it. He was not studying medicine, yet himself, in reply to a question, confirmed Stanford's opinion in that point. Neither did he appear to have pursued any course of reading which might fit him for a degree, science, or any other recognized portal, which would give him an entrance into the learned world. Yet his zeal for certain studies was remarkable, and within eccentric limits his knowledge was so extraordinarily ample and minute that his observations have fairly astounded me. Surely no man would work so hard or attain such precise information unless he had some definite end in view. Desultory readers are seldom remarkable for the exactness of their thinking. No man burdens his mind with small matters unless he has some very good reason for doing so. His ignorance was remarkable as his knowledge, Of contemporary literature, philosophy, and politics, he appeared to know next to nothing. Upon my quoting Thomas Carlyle, he inquired in the naivest way to who he might be and what he had done. By surprise, reached a climax. However, what I found incidentally, he was ignorant of the Copernican theory and of the composition of the solar system. Oh my goodness. If Sherlock is a flat earther, that'd be hilarious. Who's Thomas Carlyle? Let me double check. Alright. Ah, a British mathematician. Minister, mineralogist. Journeyed around, philosophically, natural supernaturalism. What the fuck? Natural supernaturalism. Naturalism. Carlyle rejected doctrines to profess to fully know the true nature of God, believing that to possess such knowledge is impossible. In an 1835 letter, he asked, "Where doth in nennen who dares name him? I dare not, and do not." While rejecting the charges of pantheism and expressing the empirical basis of his belief. Huh. We're learning today, chat. We're learning. That any civilized human being in his 19th century should not be aware that the Earth traveled round the Sun appeared to me such an extraordinary fact that I could hardly realize it. "You appear to be astonished," he said, smiling at my expression of surprise. "Now that I do know it, I shall do my best to forget it." "To forget it?" You see, he explained, "I consider that a man's brain originally is like a little empty attic. You have to stock it with furniture as you choose. A fool takes all the lumber in every sort, and he comes across so that his knowledge, which might be useful to him, gets crowded out, or at the best jumbled up, with a lot of other things, so that he has a difficulty in laying hands on it." Now, the skillful workman is very careful indeed as to what he takes into his brain attic. He will have nothing but the tools which may help him in doing his work, but of these he has a large assortment, in all the most perfect order. It is a mistake to think that little room has elastic walls and can distend to any extent. Depending upon it, there comes a time for which every addition of knowledge you forget is something that you knew before. It is of highest importance, therefore, to not have useless facts elbowing out the useful ones. "But the solar systems!" I protested. "What the deuce is it to me?" He interrupted impatiently. "You say that we go round the sun. If we went on the moon, it would make not a pennyworth of difference to me or my work." I was on the point of asking him what that work might be, but something in his manner showed me that his question would be an unwelcome one. I pondered over our short conversation, however, and endeavored to draw my deductions from it. It said that he would require no knowledge which did not bear upon his object. Therefore, all knowledge which he had possessed was such as would be useful to him. I enumerated in my own mind all the various points upon which he had shown me that he was exceptionally well informed. I even took a pencil and jotted them down. I could not help smiling at the document when I completed it. It ran this way. Sherlock Holmes, his limits. Sherlock Holmes, his limits. 1. Knowledge of literature, nil. Knowledge of philosophy, nil. Knowledge of astronomy, nil. Knowledge of politics, feeble. Knowledge of botany, variable. Well up in belladonna, opium, and poisons generally. Knows nothing of practical gardening. Knowledge in geology, practical but limited. Tells at a glance different soils from each other. After he walks, he has shown me splashes upon his trousers and told me by their color and the consistence in what part of London he had received them. Knowledge of chemistry, profound. Knowledge of anatomy, accurate but unsystematic. Knowledge of sensational literature, immense. He appears to know every detail of every horror perpetrated in the century. 10. Plays the violin well. 11. He's an expert single-stick player, boxer, and swordsman. 12. Has a good practical knowledge of British law. The pages stuck together. Is that the end of the list? That is the end of the list. When I had got so far in my list that I threw it in the fire in despair, if I can only find what is the fellow driving at by reconciling all these accomplishments, discovering a calling which needs them all, I said to myself, I might as well give up the attempt at once. I see that I have alluded above to his prowess upon the violin. These were very remarkable, but eccentric as all of his other accomplishments, that he could play pieces, and difficult pieces I knew well, because at my request he has played me some of Mendelssohn's Lieder and other favorites. When left to himself, however, he would seldom produce any music or attempt to any recognized air. Leaning back in his armchair of an evening, he would close his eyes and scrape carelessly at the fiddle, which was thrown across his knee, and sometimes the chords were sonorous and melancholy. Occasionally they were fantastic and cheerful. Clearly, they reflected the thoughts which possessed him. Whether the music... Oh, where am I? But whether the music aided those thoughts, or whether playing them was simply the result of a whim or fancy, I was more than I could determine. I might have rebelled against these exasperating solos had it not been that he usually terminated them by playing in quick succession in a whole series of my favorite airs as a slight compensation for the trial upon my patience. During the first week or so, we had no callers. I began to think that my companion was a friendless man, as was myself. Presently, however, I found that there was one sallow, rat-faced, dark-eyed fellow who was introduced to me as Mr. Lestrade, and who came 3 or 4 times in a single week. One morning, a young girl called, fashionably dressed, and stayed for half an hour or more. The same afternoon brought a gray-headed, seedy visitor, looking like a Jew peddler. Different time back then. Who appeared to me to be much excited, and who was closely followed by a slipshod elderly woman. On another occasion, an old white-haired gentleman had an interview with my companion, and on another, a railway porter in his velveteen uniform. When any of these nondescript individuals put in an appearance, Sherlock Holmes used to beg for the use of the sitting room, and I would retire to my bed. He always apologized to me for putting me into this inconvenience. I have to use this room as a place of business, he said. These people are my clients. Again, I had the opportunity of asking him a point-blank question, and again my delicacy prevented me from forcing another man to confide in me. I imagined that at the time he had some strong reason for not alluding to it, but he soon dispelled the idea by coming around to the subject of his own accord. It was upon the 4th of March, as I have good reason to remember, that I rose somewhat earlier than usual and found that Sherlock Holmes had not yet finished his breakfast. The landlady had become so accustomed to my late habits that my place had not been laid nor my coffee prepared, and with the usual unreasonable petulance of mankind, I rang the bell and gave a curt intimation that I was ready. Then I picked up a magazine from the table and attempted to while away with the time with it. While my companion munched silently at his toast, one of the articles had a pencil mark at the heading. I naturally began to run my eye through it. The somewhat ambitious title was The Book of Life, and it attempted to show how much an observant man might learn by an accurate and systematic examination of all that came in his way. It struck me as being a remarkable mixture of shrewdness and of absurdity. The reasoning was closely tense, but the deductions appeared to me to be far-fetched and exaggerated. Right claimed by a momentary expression, a twitch of a muscle, or a glance of an eye, to fathom a man's innermost thoughts. Deceit, according to him, was an impossibility in the case of one trained to observation and analysis, his conclusions were infallible, as so many proportions of elusive. Though startling would his results appear to the uninitiated, until they learned the processes by which they had arrived at them, they might consider him as a necromancer. From a drop of water, said the writer, a logician could infer the possibility of an Atlantic or Niagara without having seen or heard one or the other. So all life is a great chain, the nature of which is known whenever we are shown a single link of it. Like all other arts, the science of deduction and analysis is one of which that can only be acquired by long and patient study, nor is life long enough to allow any mortal to attain the highest possible perfection. Before turning to those moral and venial aspects of the matter which present the greatest difficulties, let the inquirer begin by mastering more elementary problems. Let him, on meeting a fellow mortal, learn at a glance to distinguish the history of the man, and the trade profession of which he belongs. Puerile as such an exercise may seem, it sharpens the faculties of observation. It teaches one where to look and what to look for, by a man's fingernails, by his coat sleeves, by his boots, by his trouser knees, by the calluses of his forefinger and thumb, by his expression, by his shirt cuffs. By each of these things, a man calling is plainly revealed. All that united should fail to enlighten the competent inquirer is in any case inconceivable. What ineffable twaddle! I cried, slapping the magazine down on the table. I would never read such rubbish in my life. What is it? Asked Dr. Holmes. Sherlock Holmes. He's not a doctor. Why, this article, I said, pointing at it with my egg spoon, and as I sat down to my breakfast. I see that you have read it since you have marked it. I don't deny that it is smartly written. It irritates me, though. It is evidently the theory of some armchair lounger who evolves all these neat little paradoxes in the delusion of his own study. It is not practical. I should like to see him clap down in third-class carriage on the Underground and ask him to give me the trades of all his fellow travelers. I would lay 1,000 to 1 against him. You would lose your money, Holmes remarked calmly. As for the article, I wrote it myself. You? Yes, I have returned for both observation and for deduction, theories of which I have expressed here and which appear to be, to you, to be so chimerical, are really extremely practical. So practical that I depend on them for my bread and cheese. And how? I asked involuntarily. Well, I have a trade of my own, I suppose. I am the only one in the world. I'm a consulting detective. You can understand what that is. Here in London, we have lots of government detectives and a lot of private ones. When these fellows are at fault, they come to me, and I manage to put them on the right scent. They lay all the evidence before me, and I am generally able, by the help of my knowledge and history of crime, to set them straight. There's a strong family resemblance about misdeeds and if you have all the details of 1,000 at your finger ends, it is odd that you can't unravel 1,000 at first. Lestrade is a well-known detective. He got himself into a frog recently over a forgery case, and that was what brought them here. And these other people, they were mostly put on by a private inquiry agency. They're all people who are in trouble about something and want a little enlightenment. I listen to their story, but they listen to my comments, and then I pocket my fee. What do you mean to say, I said, that without leaving a room you can unravel some knot which some other men make nothing of, although they have seen every detail for themselves? Quite so. I have kind of intuition in that. Now and again, the case turns up which is a little more complex. I have to bustle about and see things with my own eyes. You see, I have a lot of special knowledge which I apply to the problem, and which facilitates the matters wonderfully. Those rules of deduction laid down in that article, which aroused your scorn, are invaluable to me. In my practical work. Observation with me is second nature. You appeared surprised when I told you on our first meeting that you come from Afghanistan. At all, no doubt. Nothing of the sort. I knew you came from Afghanistan. From log habit of train of thoughts ran so swiftly came to my mind that I arrived at the conclusion without being conscious of the intermediate steps. There were such steps, however. The train of reasoning ran. Here is a gentleman of the medical type, but with the air of a military man. Clearly he is an army doctor, but he has just come across from the tropics, for his face is dark, and that is not the natural tint of his skin, for his wrists are fair. He has undergone hardship and sickness, as his haggard face really says. His left arm has been injured. He holds it in a stiff and unnatural manner. Where in the tropics could an Englishman, army doctor, have seen such hardship and got his armor? Clearly in Afghanistan. The whole train of thought did not occupy a second. Then I remarked that you came from Afghanistan, and you were astonished. It is simple enough as you explained it, I said, smiling. You remind me of Edgar Allan Poe's Dupin. I had no idea that such individuals exist outside of stories. Sherlock Holmes rose and lit his pipe. No doubt you think that you are complimenting me in comparing me to Dupin, he observed. Now, in my opinion, Dupin was a very inferior fellow. A trick of his in breaking in on his friend's thoughts with apropos remark after a quarter of an hour's silence is really very showy and superficial. He had some analytical genius, no doubt, but it was no means such a phenomenon as Poe appeared to imagine. Have you read Gaboriau's works? Does Lecoq come to your idea of a detective? Sherlock Holmes sniffed sardonically. Lecoq was a miserable bungler, he said, and in an angry voice. He had one thing recommended to him, and that was his energy. That book made me positively ill. The question was how to identify an unknown prisoner. I could have done it in 24 hours. Lecoq took 6 months or so. It might have made a textbook for detectives to teach them what to avoid. I felt rather indignant at having two characters whom I admired treated in this cavalier style. I walked over to the window and stood out looking into the busy street. Willow was very clever, I said to myself. Certainly very conceited. There are no crimes and no criminals these days, he said, querulously. What use is having brains in our profession? No use. I know well that I have it in me to make my name famous. No man lives or has ever lived who has brought the same amount of study and natural talent to the detection of crime which I have done. And what is the result? There is no crime to detect, or at most, bungling villainy with a motive so transparent that even a Scotland Yard's official can see through it. I was still annoyed at his bumptitious style of conversation, though I thought it better to change the topic. Wonder what that fellow was looking for, I asked, pointing to a stalwart, plainly dressed individual who was walking down the other side of the street, looking anxiously at numbers. He had a large blue envelope in his hand. It was evidently the bearer of a message. Ah, you mean the retired sergeant of Marines. I can bounce. He knows that I cannot verify his guess, I thought to myself. Thought had hardly passed through my mind when the man we were watching caught sight of the number on our door, then rapidly ran across the roadway. We heard a loud knock, a deep voice, and heavy steps descending the stair. For Mr. Sherlock Holmes, he said, stepping into the room and handing my friend the letter. Here was an opportunity of taking the conceit out of it. He little thought of this man that he made at the random shot. I ask, my lad, I said in the blandest voice, what might be your trade? Commission... What the hell? Commissionaire, sir, he said, gruffly. Uniform away for repairs. And you were? I asked, with a slightly malicious glance at my companion. Sergeant, sir. Royal Marine Light Infantry. No answer? Right, sir. He clicked his heels together and raised his hand to salute and was gone. Well, I will say that this is shaping up to be a very impressive introduction. It's certainly not beating around the bush. But, what are you guys' thoughts? As I take a short break to sip my water. Okay. This will be the last chapter I read through. It's getting a little bit late. My voice is starting to get a little bit tired. Chapter 3. The Lauriston Garden Mystery. I confess that I was considerably startled by this fresh proof of the practical nature of my companion's theories. My respect for his powers of analysis increased wondrously. There still remains some lurking suspicion in my mind, however, that the whole thing was a prearranged episode, intended to dazzle me. Though what earthly object he could have in taking me was past my comprehension. When I looked at him, he had finished reading the note, and his eyes had assumed the vacant, lackluster expression which he showed mental abstraction. How in the world did you deduce that? Deduce what? He said, petulantly. Why, that he was a retired sergeant of the Marines. I have no time for trifles. He answered, brusquely, then with a smile. Excuse me. You broke the thread of my thoughts, but perhaps it is as well. So, actually, you were not able to see that man was a sergeant of the Marines. No, indeed. It was easier to know than to explain it, why I know. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. Even across the street, I could see the great blue anchor tattooed on the back of the fellow's hand, and that smacked of the sea. He had a military carriage, however, and regulation side whiskers. There we have the Marine. Wait. Ah, yes. Facial hair. There we have the Marine. He was a man with some amount of self-importance and a certain air of command. You must have observed the way in which he held his hand and swung his cane. A steady, respectable, middle-aged man, too, on the face of him. All facts which led me to believe that he had been a sergeant. Wonderful! I ejaculated. Commonplace, said Holmes. Though I thought from his expression that he was pleased at my evident surprise and admiration. I said just now that there were no criminals. It appears that I am wrong. Look at this. He threw me over the note which the commissaire had brought. Why, I cried, cast my eye over it. This is terrible. It does seem to be a lit out of the common, he remarked calmly. Would you mind reading it out to me aloud? This is the letter which I read to him. My dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes, it has been bad business during the night at 3. Lauriston Gardens off the Brixton Road. A man on the beat saw a light there about 2 in the morning, and as the house was empty, and as the house was an empty one, suspected something was amiss. He found the door open, and in the front room, which is bare of furniture, discovered the body of a gentleman, well dressed and having cards in his pocket bearing the name of Enoch J. Drebin, Cleveland, Ohio, United States of America. There had been no robbery, nor is there any evidence as to how the man met his death. There are marks of blood in the room, but there is no wound upon his person. We are lost as to how he came into the empty house. Indeed, the whole affair is a puzzler. If you can come around to the house at any time before 12, you'll find me there. I have left everything in statu quo until I hear from you. If you are unable to come, I shall give you the fuller details, and would esteem your great kindness if you would favor me with your opinions. Yours faithfully, Tobias Gregson. Gregson is the smartest of the Scotland Yarders, my friend remarked. He and Lestrade are the pick of a bad lot. They are both quick and energetic, but conventional, shockingly so. They have the knives into one another too. They are jealous as a pair and professional beauties. There'll be some fun over this case if they are both put upon the scent. I was amazed at the calm way he rippled on. Surely is not the moment to be lost, I cried. Shall we go and order you a cab? I'm not sure about whether I shall go. I'm most incurably lazy devil ever stood in shoe leather. That is, when the fit is on me, for I can be spry enough at times. Why, is it just a chance you have been longing for? My dear fellow, what does it matter to me? Supposing I unravel the whole matter, you may be sure that Gregson, Lestrade, and Company will pocket all the credit. That comes of being an unofficial personage. But he begs you help him. Yes, he knows that I am his superior, and acknowledges it to me, but he would rather cut his tongue out before he would own to it that any third person. However, you may as well go and have a look. I shall work it out on my own hook. I may have a laugh at them, if I have nothing else. Come on. He hustled on his overcoat and bustled out in a way that showed energetic fit that superseded the apathetic one. Get your hat, he said. You wish me to come? Yes, you have nothing better to do. A minute later we were both in hansom, driving furiously for the Brixton Road. It was a foggy, cloudy morning, and a dun-coloured veil hung over the housetops. Wait. Oh, okay. That's from the sunrise. It was a foggy, cloudy morning, and a dun-colored veil hung over the housetops, looking like the reflection of a mud-colored streets beneath. My companion was in the best of spirits and prattled away about Cremona fiddles and the difference between a Stradivarius and an Amati. As for myself, I was silent, for the dull weather and melancholy business upon which engaged depressed my spirits. You don't seem to have given much thought to the matter at hand, I said at last, interrupting Holmes' musical disquisition. No data yet, he answered. It is a capital mistake to theorize before you have all the evidence. Biases the judgment. Have your data soon, I remarked, pointing with my finger. This is the Brixton Road. Excuse me. This is the Brixton Road. There it is. And that is the house, if I am not very much mistaken. So it is. Stop! Driver! Stop! We were still 100 yards or so from it, but he insisted upon our alighting. We finished our journey on foot. Number 3, Lauriston Gardens, wore an ill-omened and minatory look. It was one of 4 which stood back some way from the street, 2 being occupied and 2 empty. The latter looked out with 3 tiers of vacant, melancholy windows, which were blank and dreary, save that here and there a "to let" card had been developed and like a cataract upon the cleared plains. A green garden sprinkled over with a scattered eruption of sickly plants separated each of these houses from the street, and was traversed by a narrow pathway, yellowish in color, consisting apparently of a mixture of clay and gravel. The whole place was very sloppy from the rain which had fallen through the night. The garden was bounded by a 3-foot brick wall with a fringe of wood rails upon the top, and against this wall was leaning a stalwart police constable, surrounded by a small knot of loafers, who craned the necks and strained the eyes in vain hope of catching some glimpse of the proceedings within. I'd imagined that Sherlock Holmes would at once have hurried into the house and plunged in the study of the mystery. Nothing appeared to be further from his intention. With an air of nonchalance, which, under the circumstances, seemed to me border upon affectation, he lounged up and down the pavement and gazed vacantly at the ground, the sky, opposite houses, and a line of railings. Having finished his scrutiny, he proceeded slowly down the path, or rather down the fringe of grass which flanked the path. His eyes riveted upon the ground. Twice he stopped, and once I saw him smile. I heard him utter an exclamation of satisfaction. There were many marks of footprints upon the wet clay soil. But since the police had been coming and going over it, I was unable to see how much my companion could hope from learning anything from it. Still, I had such extraordinary evidence of the quickness of his perceptive faculties that I had no doubt that he could see a great deal which was hidden from me. At the door, we were met by a tall, white-faced, flaxen-haired man with a notebook in his hand. He rushed forward and wrung my companion's hand with effusion. "It is indeed kind of you to come," he said. "I have everything left untouched." "Except that," my friend answered, pointing at the pathway. "If a herd of buffaloes had passed along, there would not be great a mess. No doubt, however, you had drawn your own conclusions. Gregson, before you permitted this." "I've had so much to do inside the house," the detective said evasively. "My colleague, Mr. Lestrade, is here. I had relied upon him to look after this." Holmes glanced at me and raised his eyebrows sardonically. "With two men such as yourself and Lestrade upon the ground here, it would not be much for a third party to find out." Gregson rubbed his hands in a self-satisfied way. "I think we have done all that can be done," he answered. "It's a queer case, though, and I knew the taste for such things." "Did not come here in a cab?" said Sherlock Holmes. "No, sir." "Nor Lestrade?" "No, sir." "Let us go and look at my room." With that inconsequent remark, he strode onto the house, followed by Gregson, whose features expressed astonishment. A short passage, bare, planked, and dusty, led into the kitchen and offices. Two doors opened out of it to the left and right. One of these had obviously been closed for many weeks. The other belonged to the dining room, which was the apartment in which the mysterious affair had occurred. Holmes walked in, and I followed him with that subdued feeling at my heart which the presence of death inspires. The large, square dining room. Sorry, not a dining room. Yes, I am quite tired. I apologize. But I'm gonna power through this. I only got... Oh, wait. Okay, there's quite a bit more to go. Yeah, I think it's better if we stop here. Yeah, let. Yeah, we haven't gotten to the room yet. Let's stop there. So, what do you guys think? Bagel? Anyone? Festive? Nico? Kiernan? It is good. But what are your postulations on Holmes and Watson? I certainly don't have any knowledge of them aside from the Hound of the Baskervilles, which I poorly remember. Very poorly remember. Oh, you've read Holmes before as well, Bagel? Also, what did you say, Festive? It was good to listen to as I studied economics because I'm a hollow-pilled economic cell? What does that mean? Anyway, so, right, hollow. I'm aware of Spice and Wolf. I've seen up to the first transformation. You didn't capitalize it. I didn't know it was a proper noun. Hollow could also mean holographic. It means he eats green beans. Yeah, Festive, you green bean eater. I do have a few thoughts that I would posit. Seeing as I am not a detective, not the detective that well, it's not my purview to not form conclusions and risk being wrong. There was blood, but no wounds, so that implies that the assailant was stabbed, or at least injured, and then fled the scene. There's a good chance that the evidence will point towards that, just because it seems that there's a lot of implication that probably 2 footprints in, 1 footprint out. There's a good chance of it. You're 95% sure Sherlock did it. He seems to know a lot about murdering people. I mean, he certainly could probably get away with it, being the best detective in his world. But it does bear the question, who did it? But we lack evidence. We only have a theory. Perhaps the next time I do this, actually, maybe I'll just take a small break and then come back. Is that okay with everyone? No, I'm not going to bed. I'm just taking a break mid-chapter. Alright. Now, I don't quite remember what happens in The Hound of the Baskervilles, but I'm sure we'll get to it. I know that it's in this book. Like, this thing is the probably, like, equivalent weight to a Pomeranian. It's very hefty. Got gold leaf on the edges of the pages, too. But due to mishandling as a youth, some of the gold leaf has worn off from love, shall we say. I was tired of seeing it on my shelf without reading the whole thing, so I guess I'll endeavor to do that. Whether it's on stream or off stream, that's yet to decide. If you gotta piss, you gotta piss. Go. Relieve yourself. Bagel, are you still here or did you go? Oh, I'm going to put the music on. And then, we'll be back in about 15 minutes. All right. And we're back. I hope everybody got some refreshments, a snack for this interlude. It was a large, square room, looking all the larger from the absence of all furniture. A vulgar, flaring paper adorned the walls, but it was blotched in places with mildew, and here and there great strips had become detached and hung down, exposing the yellow plaster beneath. Opposite the door was a shadowy fireplace. A showy fireplace, rather, surmounted by a mantelpiece of imitation white marble. On one corner of this was stuck the stump of a red wax candle. The solitary window was so dirty that the light was hazy and uncertain, giving a dull gray tinge to everything, which was intensified by the thick layer of dust which coated the whole apartment. These details I observed afterwards. At present my attention was centered upon the single grim, motionless figure, which lay stretched upon the boards, with vacant, sightless eyes staring up at the discolored ceiling. It was that of a man of 43 or 44 years of age, middle-sized, broad shoulders, with crisp, curling black hair, and a short, stubbly beard. He was dressed in a heavy, broadcloth frock coat and waistcoat, with light-colored trousers and immaculate collar and cuffs. Top hat, well brushed and trim, was placed upon the floor beside him. His hands were clenched and his arms thrown abroad, while his lower limbs were interlocked, as though his dress struggle had been a grievous one. On his rigid face there stood an expression of horror, and, as it seemed to me, of hatred, such I had never seen upon human features. This malignant and terrible contortion, combined with the low forehead, blunt nose, and prognathous jaw, gave the dead man a singularly simious and ape-like appearance, which was increased by his writhing, unnatural posture. I have seen death in many forms, but it was never appeared to me in a far more fearsome aspect than in that dark, grimy apartment, which looked out upon one of the main arteries of suburban London. Lestrade, lean and ferret as ever, was standing by the doorway, and greeted my companion and myself. "This case will make a stir, sir," he remarked. "It beats anything I have seen, and I am no chicken." "There is no clue?" said Gregson. "None at all," chimed in Lestrade. Sherlock Holmes approached the body, and, kneeling down, examined it intently. "Are you sure that there's no wound?" he asked, pointing to numerous gouts and splashes of blood which lay out around. "Positive!" cried both detectives. "Then, of course, this blood belongs to a second individual, presumably the murderer. If the murder has been committed, it reminds me of the circumstances attendant on the death of Van Jansen in Utrecht in the year 34. Do you remember the case, Gregson?" "No, sir." "Read it up. You really should. There's nothing new under the sun. It has all been done before." As he spoke, his nimble fingers were lying there, here, there, and everywhere, feeling, pressing, unbuttoning, and examining, while his eyes wore the same far-away expression which I have already remarked upon. So swiftly was the examination made that one would hardly have guessed in the minuteness with which it was conducted. Finally, he sniffed at the dead man's lips and glanced at the soles of the patient of his patent-leathered boots. "He has not been moved at all?" he asked. "No more than was necessary for the purpose of our examination." "You can take him to the mortuary now," he said. "There's nothing more to be learned." Gregson had a stretcher in his foreman hand. At his call, they entered the room, and the stranger was lifted and carried out. As they raised him, a ring tinkled down and rolled across the floor. Strad grabbed it up and stared at it with mystified eyes. "There's been a woman here," he cried. "It's a woman's wedding ring." He held it out as he spoke, upon the palm of his hand. We all gathered round him and gazed at it. There could be no doubt the circular plain gold had once adorned the finger of a bride. "This complicates matters," said Gregson. Heaven knows they were complicated enough before. You're sure it doesn't simplify them, observed Holmes. There's nothing to be learned by staring at it. What did you find in his pockets? We have it all here, said Gregson, pointing to a litter of objects upon one of the bottom steps of the stairs. A gold watch, number 97163, by Barrard of London. Gold Albert chain, very heavy and solid. Gold ring, with Masonic device. Gold pin, bulldog's head, with rubies as eyes. Russian leather card case, with cards of Enoch J. Drever of Cleveland, corresponding with E.J.D. upon the linen. No purse, but loose money to the extent of £7.13. Pocket edition of Boccacino's Decameron. With name of Joseph Strangerson upon the flyleaf. 2 letters, one addressed to A.G. Drever and one to Joseph Strangerson. At what address? American Exchange, Strand. It is still to be left till called for. They are both from Grunion Steamship Company and refer to the sailing of boats from Liverpool. It is clear that this unfortunate man was about to return to New York. Have you made any inquiries as to this man, Strangerson? I did at once, sir, said Gregson. I have had advertisements sent to all the newspapers, and one of my men has gone to the American Exchange, but he has not returned yet. Have you sent to Cleveland? We telegraphed this morning. How did you word your inquiries? We simply detailed the circumstances and said that we should be glad of any information which could help us. You did not ask for particulars at any point which appeared to you to be crucial. I asked about Strangerson. Nothing else. There is no circumstance of which this whole case appears to hinge. Do you not telegraph again? I have said all I have to say, said Gregson, in an offended voice. Sherlock Holmes chuckled to himself and appeared to be about to make some remark, when Lestrade, who had been in the front room while we were holding this conversation in the hall, reappeared upon the scene, rubbing his hands in a pompous and self-satisfied manner. Mr. Gregson, he said, I have just made the discovery of highest importance, and one of which could have been overlooked had I not made a careful examination of the walls. The little man's eyes sparkled as he spoke, and he was evidently in a state of suppressed exultation at having scored a point against his colleague. Come here, he said, bustling to the back of the room, no atmosphere of which felt clearer since the removal of his ghastly inmate. Now stand there! He struck a match on his boot and held it up against the wall. Look at that! He said triumphantly. I have remarked that the paper had fallen away in parts, and this particular corner of the room, a large piece of peeled off, leaving a yellow square of coarse plastering. Across this bare space, there was scrawled in blood-red letters a single word: Gotcha. What do you think of that? Cried the detective, with the air of a showman exhibiting a show. Was this overlooked because it was the darkest corner of the room and no one thought to look there? The murderer has written it with his or her own blood. See this smear which has trickled down the wall? That exposes the idea of suicide anyhow. Why, was that corner chosen to write it on? Tell you. Oh, well, I'm glad you're here now. Thank you for joining in, Tyler. Where was I? Why was it that corner chosen to write on? I will tell you. See that candle on the mantelpiece? It was lit at the time, and if it was lit at this corner, it would be the brightest instead of the darkest portion of the wall. And what does that mean now that you found it? Asked Gregson, in a depreciatory voice. Mean? Why, it means the writer was going to put the female names Rachel, but was disturbed before he or she had time to finish. You mark my words, when this case comes to be cleared up, you'll find a woman named Rachel has something to do with it. It's all very well for you to laugh, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. You may be smart and clever, but as old the old hound is the best, when all is said and done. I really beg your pardon, said my companion, who had ruffled the little man's temper by bursting into an explosion of laughter. You certainly have the credit of being one of the first of us to find this out, and, as you say, it bears every mark of having been written by the other participant in last night's mystery. I have not yet had the time to examine this room yet, but with your permission I shall do so now. As he spoke, he whipped the tape measure at a large round magnifying glass from his pocket. With these two implements, he trotted noiselessly about the room, sometimes stopping, occasionally kneeling, and once laying flat upon his face. So engrossed was he with his occupation that he appeared to have forgotten our presence, for he chattered away to himself under his breath the whole time, keeping up a running fire of exclamations, groans, whispers, and little cries of suggestive encouragement and hope. As I watched him, I was irresistibly reminded of pure-blooded, well-trained foxhound, as it dashes backward and forward through the covert, whining in its eagerness until it comes across the lost scent. 20 minutes or more, he continues his researches, measuring with the most exact care the distance between marks, which were entirely invisible to me, and occasionally applying the tape up to the walls in an equally incomprehensible manner. In one place, he gathered up very carefully a little pile of grey dust from the floor, and packed it away in an envelope. Finally, he examined it with his glass, the word upon the wall, going over every letter of it, with the most minute exactness. This done, he appeared to be satisfied, for he rested his tape and his glass in his pocket. They say that genius is an infinite capacity for taking pains, he remarked with a smile. It is a very bad definition, but it does apply to detective work. Gregson and Lestrade had watched his maneuvers and their amateur companion with considerable curiosity and some contempt. They evidently failed to appreciate that fact, which I had begun to realize, that Sherlock Holmes's smallest actions were all directed towards some definite and practical end. What do you think of it? They both asked. It would be robbing you of the credit of the case if I were to presume to help you, remarked my friend. You are doing so well now that it would be a pity for anyone to interfere. There was a word of sarcasm in his voice as he spoke. If you will let me know how far your investigations go, he continued, I shall be happy to give you any help that I can. In the meantime, I should like to speak to the constable who found the body. Can you give me his name and his address? Lestrade glanced at his notebook. John Rance, he said. He's off duty now. You will find him at 46 Audley Court, getting to Park Gate. Holmes took a note of the address. Come along, Doctor. Shall go and look him up. I'll tell you one thing, which may help the case, he continued, turning to two detectives. There's been a murder done, and the murder was a man. He was more than 6 feet high, was the prime of his life, had a small feet for his height, wore coarse, square-toed boots, smoked a Trichinopolis cigar. He came here with his victim in a four-wheeled cab. It was drawn by a horse with 3 old shoes and 1 new one off his foreleg. In all probability, the murderer had a florid face, and the fingernails of his right hand were remarkably long. There are only a few indications, but they may assist you. Lestrade and Gregson glanced at each other with an incredulous smile. If this man was murdered, how was it done? Was the former. Poison, said Sherlock Holmes curtly and strode off. On one thing, Lestrade, he added, turning around at the door. Rache is the German word for revenge, so don't lose your time looking for Miss Rachel. With which Parthian shot, he walked away, leaving 2 rivals open-mouthed behind him. Alright. Do I press on? What's 7? 8 more pages. It was 1 o'clock when we left Chapter 4. What John Rance had to tell. It was 1 o'clock when we left number 3 Lauriston Gardens. Sherlock Holmes led me to the nearest telegraph office, whence he dispatched a long telegram. He then hailed the cab and ordered the driver to take us to the address given to us by Lestrade. There's nothing like first-hand evidence, he remarked. As a matter of fact, my mind is entirely made up upon the case, but we may as well learn all that there is to be learned. You amaze me, Holmes, said I. Surely you are not as sure as you pretend to be of all those particulars which you gave. There is no room for mistake, he answered. The very first thing which I observed upon arriving was that the cab had made 2 ruts with the wheels so close to the curb. Now, up to last night, we have had no rain for a week, though those wheels which left such a deep impression must have been there during the night. There were marks upon the horse's hoofs, too, the outline of one, which was far more clearly cut than that of the other 3, showing that there was a new shoe. Since the cab was there after the rain began, there was not at any time during the morning. I have Gregson's word for that. It follows that it must have been there during the night, and therefore that it brought those 2 individuals to the house. That seems simple enough, said I, but how about the other man's height? Why, the height of a man, in 9 cases out of 10, can be told from the length of his stride. It is a simple calculation enough, although there is no use my boring you with the figures. I had this fellow's stride both on the clay outside and on the dust within. Then I had a way of checking my calculation. When a man writes on a wall, it instinctively leads him to write about the level of his own eyes. Now that writing was just over 6 feet from the ground. Child's play. And his age? Well, if a man can stride 4.5 feet without the smallest effort, can't be quite in the sear and yellow. That was the breadth of the puddle on the garden wall, which he had evidently walked across. Patent-leathered boots had gone round, and square toes had hopped over. There's no mystery about it at all. I am simply applying to ordinary life a few of those precepts of observation and deduction which I advocated in that article. Is there anything else that puzzles you? The fingernails on the trichinopoly, I suggested. The writing on the wall was done with a man's forefinger, dipped in blood. My glass allowed me to observe that the plaster was slightly scratched in doing it, which would not have been the case when the man's nail had been trimmed. I gathered up some scattered ash from the floor. It was dark in color and flaky, such as ash only made by a trichinopoly. I have made a special study of cigar ashes. In fact, I have written a monograph upon the subject. I thought to myself that I can distinguish at a glance the ash of any known brand of either cigar or tobacco. It is in such details that the skilled detective differs from the Gregson and Lestrade type. With a florid face. Ah, that was more of a daring shot, though I've no doubt that I was right. You must not ask me that present state. You must not ask me that at the present state of the affair. I passed my hand over the brow. It is in a whirl. The more one thinks of it, the more mysterious it grows. How came these 2 men, if they were 2 men, into an empty house? And what has become of the cabman who drove them? How could one man compel another to take poison? Where did the blood come from? What was the object of the murderer, since robbery had no part in it? How came the woman's ring in there? Above all, why should the second man write up the German one's rock before camping? I confess that I do not see any possible way of reconciling all these facts. My companion smiled approvingly. You sum up the difficulties of the situation succinctly, and well, there is much that is still obscure, though I've made up my mind quite succinctly on the main facts. As to poor Lestrade's discovery, I was simply blind intended to put the police on the wrong track. By suggesting socialism in secret societies, it was not done by a German. The A, as you notice, was printed somewhere after the German faction. Now, a real German invariably prints in the Latin character, though we may safely say this was not written by one, but by a clumsy imitator who overdid his part. It was simply a ruse to divert inquiry into a wrong channel. I am not going to tell you much more of the case, Doctor. You know a conjurer gets no credit when at once he has explained his trick, and if I show you too much of my method working, you will come to the conclusion that I am a very ordinary individual after all. I shall never do that, I answered. You've brought direction as near as an exact science as it ever will be brought into this world. My companion flushed up with pleasure in my words, and the earnest way in which I had already observed that he sensitive to flattery on the score of his art as any girl could be of her beauty. I will tell you one other thing, he said. Patent Leathers and Square Toes came in the same cab, and they walked down the pathway together as friendly, possible arm in arm, in all probability. When they got inside, they walked up and down the room, or rather, Patent Leathers stood while Square Toes walked up and down. I could read all that in the dust, and I could read that as he walked, he grew more and more excited. That is shown by increased length of his strides. He was talking all the while, working himself up, no doubt, into a fury. Then the tragedy occurred. I've told you all I know myself now. The rest is a mere surmise and conjecture. We have good working basis, however, on which to start. We must hurry. If I want to go to Hale's concert to hear Norman Neruda this afternoon. The conversation occurred while a cab had been threading its way through a long succession of dingy streets and dreary byways. The dingiest and dreariest of them, our driver suddenly came to a stand. That's only caught in there, he said, pointing to a narrow slit in the line of dead-colored brick. You'll find me here when you come back. Audley Court was not an attractive locality. The narrow passage led into a quadrangle paved with flags and lined by sordid dwellings. We picked our way among groups of dirty children and through lines of discolored linen until we came to number 46. The door of which was decorated with a small slip of brass which the name Rance was engraved. On inquiry, we found that the constable was in bed. We were shown into a little front parlor to await his coming. He appeared presently, looking a little irritable at being disturbed in slumbers. I made my report at the office. Holmes took a half-sovereign out of his pocket and played with a pencil. We thought that we should like to hear it all from your own lips, he said. I shall be most happy to tell you everything I can, the constable, with his eyes upon the little golden beard. Just let it hear it all in your own way as it occurred. Rance sat down on the horsehair sofa and knitted his brows as though determined not to omit anything in the narrative. I'll tell ye from the beginning. My time is from 10 at night to 6 in the morning. At 11 there was a fight in the White Hart, but bar that, all was quiet enough on the beat. At 1 o'clock it began to rain, and I met Harry Mercer, him who has Golden Grove beat, and we stood together at the corner of Henrietta Street talking. Presently, maybe about 2 or a little after, I thought it would take a look around and see that all was right down the Brixton Road. It was precious, dirty and lonely. Not a soul did I meet all the way down, though a cab or two went past me. I was strolling down, thinking between ourselves how uncommon handy a 4 gin hot would be, when suddenly a glint of light caught my eye in the window of that same house. Now I knew then that 2 houses in Lauriston Gardens was empty on account of him owns them who won't have the drains seed to. Oh God, this is hard to read. Though the very last tenant but lived in one of them died of typhoid fever. I was knocked all in a heap, therefore, seeing a light in the window, and I suspected something was wrong. When I got to the door, he stopped, and then walked back to the garden gate. My companion interrupted. What did you do that for? Rance gave a violent jump and stared at Sherlock Holmes, with the utmost amazement on his features. Why, that's true, sir, he said. But how did you come to know it? Heaven only knows. You see, when I got up at the door, it was so still and so lonesome that I thought I'd none worse for someone with me. I ain't afeard of anything on this side of the grave, but I thought that it might have been him that died of typhoid inspecting the drains what killed him. Such a silly way of speaking. I appreciate that. I'm glad that I'm soothing you. If you want to take a nap, take a nap. If you want to pay attention, pay attention. It's what it is. This is just a casual fun time stream. The thought gave me a kind of turn, and I walked back to the gate to see if I could see Mercer's lantern, but there wasn't no sight of him or anyone else. There was no one out in the seat. Not a living soul, sir. Nor as much as a dog. Then I pulled myself together and went back and pushed the door open. All was quiet inside, so I went into the room where one light was a-burning, and there was a candle flickering on the mantelpiece, a red wax one. And by its light I saw... Yes, I know all what you saw. You walked around the room several times, you knelt down by the body, and then you walked through and tried the kitchen door, and then... John Rance sprang to his feet with a frightened face and a suspicion in his eyes. "Where did you see all that?" he cried. "It seems to me that you know deals more than you should." Holmes laughed and threw his card across the table to the constable. "Don't go arresting me for the murder," he said. "I am one of the hounds and not the wolf. Mr. Gregson or Mr. Lestrade will answer for that. Go on, though. What did you do next?" Francis resumed his seat without, however, losing his mystified expression. "I went back to the gate and sounded my whistle. That brought Murcher and the two more to the spot. Was the street empty then?" "Well, it was, as far as anybody that could be of any good goes." "What do you mean?" The constable's features broadened into a grin. "I've seen many a drunk chap in my time," he said, "but never anyone so crying drunk as that cove. He was at the gate when I came out, a-leaning up against the railings, and a-singing a pitch of his lungs about Columbine's newfangled banner, or some such stuff. He couldn't stand, far less help." "What sort of man was he?" asked Sherlock Holmes. John Rance appeared to be somewhat irritated at this digression. "He was an uncommon drunk sort of man," he said. "He'd have found himself in the station if we hadn't been so took up. His face, his dress, you didn't notice them?" Holmes broke out impatiently. "I should think I did notice them, seeing that I had to prop him up, me and Murcher between us. He was a long chap, with a red face, lower part muffled round." "That will do," cried Holmes. "What became of him?" "We'd enough to do without looking after him," the policeman said in an aggrieved voice. "I'll wager you found his way home all right." "How was he dressed?" "Brown overcoat." "Had he a whip in his hand?" "A whip? No." "He must have left it behind," muttered my companion. "You didn't happen to see or hear a cab after that?" "No." "There's a half-sovereign for you," my companion said, standing up and taking his hat. "I'm afraid, Rance, that you will never rise in the force. That head of yours should be for his use as well as an ornament. You might have gained your sergeant's stripes last night. The man whom you held in your hands was the man who holds the clue in this mystery and whom we are seeking. There's no use arguing about it now. I tell you that it is so. Come along, Doctor." We started off with the cab together, leaving our informant incredulous, but obviously uncomfortable. "Thundering fool," Holmes said, bitterly as we drove back to our lodgings. "Just to think of his having such an incomparable bit of good luck, and not taking advantage of it." "I'm rather still in the dark still. Is it true that the description of this man tallies with your idea of a second party in the mystery? But why should he come back to the house and leaving it? Not the way of criminal." "The ring, my man, the ring. That was what we came back for. If we have no other way of catching him, we can always bait our line with the ring. I shall have him, Doctor. I will lay you 2-to-1 that I have him. I must thank you for it all. I must not have gone out but for you, and so I've missed the finest study I have ever come across. A study in Scarlet, eh? They said it! They said the title in the book! Why shouldn't we use the little art jargon? There's the scarlet thread of this murder running through the colorless skin of life. And our duty is to unravel it and isolate it and expose every inch of it. And now for lunch, and then for Norman Neruda. Her attack and bowing are splendid. What's the little thing of Chopin's he plays so magnificently? Tra-la-la-dee-ra-dee-ra-dee. Leaning back in the cab, his amateur bloodhound carolled away like a lark while I meditated upon the many-sidedness of the human mind. And with that, that concludes chapters 1 through 4 of A Study in Scarlet. If I read any more, I might fall asleep myself. But, we got someone new in the chat, so let me just... moment. Oh, hey, Ito, you just missed the stream. Wait. And, if you would like to... Studying German with Knives? Oh, Knives was in here earlier. That must have been where he went. But yeah, Tyler, that's the Discord. If you have Discord, that's where I usually announce. I also have Twitter, which should be in the description. I try to post on there, at least when I'm starting to stream. Good night. I'm quite intrigued by this all. Was the ring of any value? I mean, it's a gold ring, so it had to be of value. An interesting conundrum, indeed. Perhaps it was Rachel. There's a chance of it. But it's not something to go off of. There are probably numerous Rachels in London. Well, I'll be back perhaps Wednesday with this. Oh yeah, I've read Hound of the Baskervilles, and I have a very loose remembrance of it. As I was reading that scene describing like the writing on the wall, I remembered because this was as far as I got when I was younger, and then I put the book down. I had remembered imagining that Brache was written on the wall of a hallway and not of a large room. I'm not sure how I got to that. It was a different printing. But I do remember that. The ring I didn't remember, but I was a child, so... Well, children are quite stupid. Either way, thank you for joining. I hope you enjoyed. Leave a like, follow, and subscribe if you enjoyed. And I will see you all next time. Good night. Stay safe and stay beautiful.